Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Anaya, and welcome to the Women's Eye podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. This is where we introduce you to fascinating women who are leaving their mark, making a difference, and changing the world. This episode is brought to you by CASCO Financial Group, located in Phoenix, Arizona. Catherine Scrivano is the president of CASCO Financial Group. She founded her business to help people create the financial strength needed for achieving their dreams and building money power. Her belief is you don't have to be wealthy to be wise. And Catherine is my guest today. Welcome back to the Women's Eye, Catherine.
It's great seeing you.
Good to see you too. You know what? I am forever using the phrase, if I win the lottery, I'm going to do this and I'm going to buy this. And I never stop to think about what kind of winning is enough to do all the things I would want to do. Like what would that amount actually be? How many several $1 million would it actually take? So today, I'm very excited that we're going to talk about how much is enough because, of course, our personal experiences and our values and our goals, they really influence how we would answer that question. And because it is truly different for everyone, right?
Right. And you know what? I want to give you a little credit. You're not saying when I win the lottery.
Right.
Because that is not a financial plan, just despite how many people think, if you win the lottery, it's fun to fantasize about that, isn't it?
It is.
We love to talk about our foundation that we would create and all of the things we would support. But that's not a financial plan, and it's fun to fantasize. But in the real world, when you're talking about your actual life, it's very important to know what is enough. And that's going to be different for everyone. And it may be different for individuals within a partnership too. We have to acknowledge that.
That is true. So let's talk about some of the things that may influence someone's definition of how much is too much. How I was raised and how my parents dealt with money has everything to do with my relationship with money.
Absolutely.
Parents are a big factor in how we perceive and how we deal with money, correct?
Absolutely. You know, just very basically, our parents, looking to them may give us some clue as to our life expectancy. Genetics play a big part in that. So looking at parents there, but also probably equally important is how did they deal with money? Was money talked about in your home, or was it a taboo subject? Maybe it was a source of worry or envy. Is there a sense of abundance, a sense of scarcity? People who heard stories of the Great Depression and are now telling stories about the Great Recession and the global pandemic, all of these stories are going to influence our attitudes around money.
Well, and also our career is a big influence in how we approach money. There are so many people who work to live a certain way, and then there are those who live a certain way because they love their work, right?
You and I know some amazing people who work in the nonprofit industry and have adjusted their lifestyle, their expectations, their definition of enough to allow them to do work that is meaningful to them. We both, I'm sure, know others who are absolutely miserable human beings 40 hours a week because they have a plan to start living their life and having enough money at the end of some time period. Again, it's a matter of knowing what's important to you. What are your values? We can attach some dollar values and assume that pile of money is going to be enough. But if you just lean toward it, chances are you won't make it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think our circle of friends also, have a lot of influence when it comes to how we perceive money. Would you agree? The amount of time with certain people and who those people are, whether we want to admit that or not, but it goes a little deeper than just keeping up with the Joneses.
It's interesting because, I think that we all are reluctant to admit that we're influenced by our peers. But in conversations with our clients, we're finding very often that that's a huge influence, not just keeping up, but giving a sense of independence or giving a sense of, that everything is fine. And I think very interestingly, we probably see as many people who hide their wealth as they do flaunt it. They don't want to
Mm.
make their peers feel uncomfortable. They don't want to be hit up for a loan. For a
Right.
variety of reasons, they live uh, below their means, and their friends would be very surprised to find out that they do have as much money as they want. But once again, it's a definition of enough. How much money do I need to support my life consistent with my values? That can
Hmm.
be very different for other people. I think that we have been raised to kind of lean toward being a millionaire. And if you are in your 90s, there's a very good chance having a pile of dollars that totals $1 million, that may very well be enough. If your goal when you're 20 years old, starting out right now, is to retire with $1 million, that may not be enough to make a big difference in your lifestyle.
Hmm. It's just interesting how much goes into our perspective and relationship. And you also mentioned to me previously that religious and or spiritual reasons are oftentimes behind how people determine how much is enough. Can you explain that a little bit?
People feel a very strong commitment to a belief, and that can influence certain attitudes around practices and money. I think I shared with you a story a while back about a couple that we worked with who were so enthusiastic about paying off debt and saving for retirement. We designed a plan that felt just like a perfect fit, and we were surprised they couldn't stick to it. We just kept digging and digging and found that they had eliminated tithing to their church. So this was contradictory to something that they firmly believed in. And yet, in their enthusiasm around getting out of debt and doing the savings, they had neglected something that was important and were inadvertently sabotaging the plan. So once we identified what the issues were, we were able to incorporate that giving into their spending plan. And it taught us to ask better questions, not
Mhm.
necessarily take the response at face value, but dig a little bit deeper, ask some questions that eliminate things that maybe people hadn't even considered. But
Mhm.
we've had more of those aha moments than we might have otherwise without that
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah, you usually don't come away with a financial plan in one meeting. I mean,
No,
this is
no.
an ongoing
Mhm,
process.
mhm.
Once you've determined, whether it's individually or as a couple, what you consider is sufficient, how do you then go about applying that insight into a financial plan?
Well, the first thing we're doing is separating the goals by importance and by time frame. We're not going to use the same strategy to fund a college education for a newborn as we might for one who's entering her freshman year of high school. So we talk about the importance of these goals, talk about how much time we have to work toward them, and then we can um, establish the pot of money that would be necessary, determine what is enough. And we acknowledge things that may not necessarily just be driven by money. I think of a couple that we've worked with for a long time. There is a certain amount of money in their plan that is reserved and not available for long-term goals. It's
Hmm.
parked in the bank, and it's her sleep at night money. If she has that amount in the bank with no attachments to it, she doesn't worry about fluctuations in markets or change in jobs or any of the things that inevitably happen throughout our lives, because she has her sleep at night fund, and we just leave that darn thing alone. We test every year and say, is it enough? And there's been times when we've increased it. She would sleep better if it was a little bit bigger number, but most of the time she's just content with it, and it's enough.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that because our producer Pam wanted me to ask you a question, which at first she said, oh, that might be something for a therapist. But I said, well, Catherine has very often said that she sometimes feels like a therapist.
I do.
Um, so she wanted me to ask you, what your thoughts are on, can we ever just be satisfied with what we have? And it's interesting because as I was preparing to ask you that question today, I thought to myself, I have friends that have lots of money, big houses. I admire it from afar, but I look at my own life where I live, modestly. And I think to myself, I wouldn't want that because that's not my lifestyle. I can appreciate it, but I know that I wouldn't know what to do with myself in a house like that, much less try to upkeep it. So how would you answer that question? Because what I'm saying is, I think I'm satisfied with what I have. Do you believe that people can be satisfied with what they have? I mean, am I just living a fantasy life here?
No, I agree with your first remark was this is almost a therapy question. But having acknowledged where my expertise ends, I will tell you from experience, there are people who are very satisfied. It's real easy to figure out what that number is as enough. And those people tend to be very optimistic, very grateful for what they do have a broader perspective comparing themselves to others and recognizing that they're lucky. Again, the people that you and I talked about earlier who maybe work in careers that don't pay a great deal but are very satisfying.
Yes.
There are other people for whom, in my opinion, there is never enough. There's some kind of a hole to be filled, and probably dollars are not the solution. There probably aren't enough dollars. And we literally went through a relationship with a client recently where we did suggest that they get some professional help because they weren't able to accept that the numbers showed they'd be all right. And it was just out of our area, and thank goodness she agreed to do that. So it's a matter of our own experiences, our own values. I think in your story of people with big, beautiful houses, I know a woman whose home is so beautifully decorated. I admire her talent, her ability to put things together. It's not my taste. I have no interest in duplicating her home or moving into her home the way it's decorated. I can appreciate it, admire it for her, but I don't want it for myself.
I don't know about you, but that makes me feel pretty grown up. I feel like such an adult these days.
There's plenty of areas in which I'm kind of not adulting very well, but time and experience, I think, do teach us what is important, what lasts. And you and I are both blessed with great kids. I think that's the best investment we've ever made.
Well, I just, of course, always appreciate your insight, information, your expertise. Thank you so much, Catherine. Always a pleasure chatting with you. And thank you for being a regular contributor to the Women's Eye podcast.
It's one of my favorite things that I do. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, you can learn more about Catherine on our website at thewomenseye.com. Do not forget that the Women's Eye has a book. It's called 20 Women Changemakers. You can find it at changemakersbook.com. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Women's Eye podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Catherine Anaya. Until next time, remember, it's the world as we see it.